Okay, thank you everyone for coming. I'll just briefly introduce myself, and I'd like to welcome all the guests for coming today to this dedication ceremony for the Central Roll Call Room for Robert William Stewart. I'm going to go ahead and get started with the program here, and obviously. The importance of Black History Month here in the city of Los Angeles is going to be a running theme here, and we're kicking it off this month with this ceremony here on the Los Angeles Police Department. A little bit about myself. I'm Deputy Chief Alan Hamilton. I'm the Commanding Officer of Operations Valley Bureau. A little bit more about myself. You're probably wondering why I'm standing here. I'm currently the First Vice President of the Association of Black Law Enforcement Executives, and we are basically an organization that consists of lieutenants and above and command staff and civilian leaders, both inside the department and with our allied partner agencies that work towards improving and mentoring the up-and-coming African-American leaders on our department. We work very closely with the Oscar Joel Bryant Association, and we work to improve the department. So what we do is we look to improve, encourage, and motivate all of our current leaders and our future leaders here on the Los Angeles Police Department. It's an organization that was started back in the 70s by a group of command officers, and we've had it going ever since. So that is how I ended up here. In addition, a little bit about me. I'm LA born and raised. I was born in South Central Los Angeles. I apologize for all of you out there that have gone to Crenshaw, Dorsey, Dorsey Dons, and the Crenshaw Cougars. I'm an Inglewood Sentinel, so I'm sorry. But born and raised in LA schools until I went to Inglewood, and came up through the city of Los Angeles, went to school here, joined the department, and I've been on the department now for almost 32 years. So I'm just getting started. Looking forward to continuing my role in ABLE and helping to not only promote and assist our African American leadership, but all of the leadership throughout this department and make this a better department. So I want to also give special thanks to our esteemed guests here. Of course, we have Chief of Police Michael Moore. We have Deputy Chief Joe Woodyard, I believe, is in the crowd, and we have Deputy Chief Amada Tingarides up here with me. We have Captain Stacy Spell, Captain Aaron McCraney, who is our Recruitment and Employment Division Commanding Officer. We're hiring. We have Captain Elaine Morales, who is the Commanding Officer of Central Division. I think I saw her walking around out here somewhere. Yes. And we have Commander Al Neal, I believe, is here as well. All right. And we also have up here to my left, Councilmember Curran Price, who will be providing comments, as well as Chief John Thomas, USC Department of Public Safety, recently liberated and retired, who I speak to frequently and give a hard time all the time about his new retired status. And we have Michael Lawson, who is going to provide some information regarding what's going on as well. And we also have Mike Davison, who is going to provide a historical perspective and some of the research that he's been doing in regards to the life and the times and the history of Robert William Stewart. So with that being said, I'd also like to recognize Sergeant 2, Jody Steiger. I believe he's here as well. He is the president right now of the Oscar Joel Bryant Foundation, and he is my counterpart in making sure that the rank and file of the Los Angeles Police Department, our African American officers, leadership, etc., are also being helped out in the process and working very hard to make this department a better place, not only for African American sworn and civilian employees, but overall in improving the leadership of the department. So without further ado, I'm going to hand the mic over and get this thing going. I think you've heard enough about me. I'm going to ask Councilmember Price to come up and say a few words. Councilmember?
Thank you, Deputy Chief. Really appreciate the introduction. To our women and men in blue and special guests, I just want to say good afternoon. And I also want to thank Chief Moore, special thanks, for inviting me to this important event during Black History Month. Let me just acknowledge and commend Chief Moore's commitment to increasing diversity and making the force more representative of the city's population. And I understand he's not through yet. We still got some work to do, but Chief, we appreciate your efforts. And also, let me just say, Chief, that we really appreciated your touching and inspiring remarks this morning at the service for Fernando Arroyos. It was difficult for all, but I think you helped set the tone. And then finally, let me just thank the men and women and you who have, in and out of uniform, who took an oath to protect and serve our city. You know, especially my district, District 9, throughout the course of this pandemic. It's been real tough for all of us. And I recognize there have been many officers who've succumbed to COVID, and I just want to give my condolences to the department and the families that were involved. They made the ultimate sacrifice while serving our community, and I just want to say thank you. During the summer of 2020, we saw hundreds and thousands of Angelenos flow into our streets, calling for racial justice and righting the wrongs from our country's past. The Board of Police Commissioners and the LAPD did their part, and in 2021 took steps to reinstate and then retire Officer Robert William Stewart, the force's first black officer in the city's history, and that is significant. My colleagues and I reaffirmed the board's decision when we passed a resolution to rename LAPD's Central Area Roll Call Room after Officer Stewart. So as some of you may know, Stewart was the eldest of 11 children and was born into slavery in Kentucky. In his mid-30s, he traveled across the country to Los Angeles like many freed slaves did. He worked in a number of jobs to support himself and his family. His hard work and dedication to our city earned him an appointment to the LAPD in 1889. He was literally the Jackie Robinson, the Jackie Robinson of the police department, and served with honor as a police officer. Not surprisingly, though, as an officer, he faced constant harassment from residents and from colleagues. Let's just be honest. It was not an easy matter. Nevertheless, he was undeterred and continued to serve all Angelenos to the best of his ability. Some 11 years into his career, he was removed from the force after being accused of sexually harassing a white teenage girl. Now, he knew from the beginning that this was a trumped-up charge. It wasn't true. It didn't happen. Nevertheless, he was jailed, assumed guilty before any trial, and I understand he was incarcerated for several months. He was finally acquitted. I think there were 2 trials, correct? The first trial was a hung jury. Second trial, he was acquitted in less than a half hour because everyone knew it was just a bogus charge. Nevertheless, he was not taken back on the force. He worked the rest of his life as a janitor, a laborer, positions he held when he first moved to LA. You can imagine how that hurt him. Man of pride, man of dignity, a man of honor, and yet the profession that he loved, the profession that he served in so well, turned their back on him. The story of Officer Stewart is both remarkable and tragic. Remarkable because he was able to break the color barrier with the LAPD, but tragic because he was accused of something he did not do, just because of the color of his skin. That was the only reason he suffered that charge. Our city's not perfect, but this recognition of Officer Stewart shows that it is never too late to admit a mistake, and to do the right thing. That's something that takes a lot of courage. And I think this is a significant way to pay homage not only to his family, but to his ancestors, and all of us who bear witness to it today. This is just what we want to see happen in our police department, because it is what the citizens and the people in LA deserve. Again, in the name of Robert William Stewart, I want to thank you for your service to our city. Let us never forget the injustice that was done and the need that we always have to do the right thing. Even when it's 100 years later, let's make sure we're doing the right thing. Thank you for letting me join you in this special celebration. Chief.
Councilmember, thank you very much for being here and also your continued support of our men and women, and for all of Los Angeles, your service on the council. Today is long overdue, as has been said. I want to first apologize to everyone here. This is California sunshine in February. Give you some solace, it's snowing in New York. So this is our effort, though, because of the ongoing pandemic and the dangers and real risks that pose. We're dedicating a roll call room. And we're dedicating a roll call room, an initiative that started some 3+ years ago. And it's taken us some time to organize it, but it's taken us even more time in order to get the time and place where we could have a room downstairs where you could see it, you could see the plaque and be a part of that. And we've envisioned that occurring. Just 6 months ago, we'd hoped that was something that was going to happen, and then we saw the Omicron variant come on as strong as it has. So I just want to say thank you again for allowing us here on this platform to conduct today's ceremony with safety in mind, as well as to honor a great man, a man who is a legend in this organization, and an effort today, a small part of us to try to make a bit right for the wrongs that we, as a department and as a city and as a country, caused him, caused his legacy. Yeah. There's a number of individuals here I want to thank that brought this about. Let me first say that Fred Booker, special assistant in my office, the office or the community relations section, came to me upon my appointment, and one of the things that was going on at the time, this was prior to the events of George Floyd, the murder, the civil unrest, the reckoning of this country, to social justice and criminal justice reform, social justice reform, issues of racial inequities and the wrongs as a society that we still have it going today, but brought forth an occasion of this man and his experience with LAPD as one of the first black police officers in Los Angeles. And I also want to thank JT, John Thomas, a man that I've known with a great deal of respect, and many of you know him as a former public safety director, the chief, if you will, of USC policing or public safety, recently retired. But what I know him is JT of LAPD. He retired here some 15+ years ago, and I remember as an up-and-coming commander, deputy chief, an individual who was committed to identifying in this department our past transgressions, where as an organization we had our own selves as we pursued public safety, as we pursued the role of policing in the city, exercise the same types of racism, prejudice, and bias that we saw in our society. And while historically as an organization we'd often argue about that and justify it or explain it away, he was a person that was really, in my history, one of the first to approach it in a manner that was built on facts, built on research, built on not just anecdotal stories, but a documentation to correct history that was written by someone else, and perhaps someone else with different motives and means of smoothing things over. which we have a tendency in this country and across as a human existence to do. It wouldn't have been possible without people such as Mike Davison, though, as well as the Historical Society, the Los Angeles Police Historical Society, because it was their hard work and energy with JT's commitment, Fred's knowledge, that allowed us to do, again, the due diligence. For those of you that aren't aware, and I think a number of the media outlets that are here today, this department particularly is blessed with an asset that is so sorely missing in American policing. And that is a place and a location in which to store, archive, and show and represent our history. Our Historical Society is in the former Northeast Police Station on York Boulevard in the northeast part of the city here. And at that location, not just a very popular location for filming, but it's a historical society that was established in the mid-1990s and is there today with a long-term lease and the support of our city council and our elected officials. It is a place in which we can, in fact, store our artifacts and tell our story of policing for more than 150 years. And it is also a historical society made up of both donors but also people who have a dedicated interest in making sure that our stories are not fable, they're not folklore, but they're rooted in the truth, blemishes, warts and all. Because while this department has some of the finest moments and has set the tone for policing across the world, we have also created some of the darkest moments in American policing. And we have fallen short or fallen prey to going along with the status quo, whatever that was at the time. And as a chief with 40 years in this organization, I've seen that. Unfortunately, I've been here long enough to see that history, if you will, as an own personal experience. But as I reflect back on 150 years, which we did 2 years ago, we were really kind of set at the time to tell all the good stories, to talk about the innovations in policing, and it wasn't so much about the rest of the story, as Paul Harvey would say. And it was in the efforts of Fred and JT, the Historical Society, and Commissioner Dale Bonner, who also asked us, well, what about 39th and Dalton? What about Rodney King? What about the instances of detectives being arrested attempting to commit a murder? What about these stories and stories? And including the injustices, whether you were a woman, a black, a Hispanic, and a member of the LGBTQ. Times in which, as an organization, we would not allow officers to walk in a parade because it was going to recognize and honor and demonstrate solidarity with an LGBT community. And while much of that has changed to the times in which we arrive today, in 2022, over the last decades, we've seen that we need to go back and update our account. And the reason for me on that is so important is that because we continue to hire people from our community, men and women that are dedicated to a life of service, but they may not know our history. And they're subject to thinking that, well, we pretty much got it right today. Every generation has thought that. And every generation, over time, learns that it carries its own demons, its own shortfalls. Fast forward into this aftermath of George Floyd's murder and the civil unrest and the calls for social justice reform and our development of our diversity, equity, and inclusion officer, Commander Flores, and our initiatives to look both internally and externally, this project has served very well. You're going to hear from the historian who did the research, the finer details. For those of you that have not seen it yet, I would encourage you also to go to YouTube. That's not a pitch for that particular vendor. But to go to CityView, Channel 35, who did a documentary, a great documentary in my view, that is over a 30-minute period, talks about the history of this great man and the path to here today, and also an opportunity to reflect upon the path forward. Downstairs, the roll call room. Why? That man there started as a footbeat officer a few short blocks behind me on Broadway. And so it is right and fitting that we name a location and honor a person who walked the streets in this area of town, even though it was more than 100 years ago. It's also a room where every member of this command starts their day. And they get to walk into a room and see that it is honoring a person for his integrity, for his service, his zeal for life, and also a bit of history about how we got it wrong in an effort to make it right. So that bit of humility in that last part to recognize that as we go about our work, we have to be mindful that while an organization may believe it's right, it doesn't make it so. And we have to always be mindful of how are our actions actually viewed and seen and interpreted, and how should we and can we adjust our path so that we build the trust and build the confidence in the organization that we're going to respect everyone. So in closing, this is a long overdue day. I apologize again for the venue, but let me assure you the venue, this building will stand for decades to come. It is a location that we will honor with this man's name and his lineage, and we will inform a generation going forward about this small piece of our history, but an important one, so that they recognize that our efforts, an organization as great as this is, that it's only made up of people, and that its greatest asset is that. And we must always treat them right and fair, and be reflective of the values that what we call our core values. Thank you all for being here. Thanks to my guests and everyone that has been a part and a play in this. It has mattered. Lastly, I'll close. The generosity of the Police Foundation cannot be overstated. Dana, thank you for being here as your executive director, as their executive director, and supporting the actual procurement of the plaque itself, so that we can make sure that it's a lasting tribute that withstands the test of time. God bless you all, and thank you very much.
Thank you for those very kind, generous words, Chief Moore. I would be remiss if I didn't include some of our other command staff that are out in the audience here. We have Captain Steve Ruiz, who's out here to join us today. Captain Lanier Childs Graves, who is also out here to join us today. And you're going to have to stand up. Former Deputy Chief Phil Tingerides. Yeah, there's no hiding from me. So we're going to get into kind of the meat of this now, and I'm going to bring up two people that I work very closely with in making sure that, you know, the historical accuracy of these events are correctly recorded. So I'm first going to bring up my friend. I refer to him as JT, so I apologize, but someone that is deeply and intimately familiar with the African American history of the Los Angeles Police Department and of this city. Someone that has provided countless hundreds of hours to making sure that we get the facts right and we know our history and that we own our history, both the good and the bad. Someone that I call a friend, someone that I've gone to for mentorship in the past, someone that has provided sound advice to me in my career, and someone that is a very proud former Los Angeles police officer. And still a reserve. And we're still hiring reserves. JT, come on up.
Thanks, Alan. And since you represented your high school, I'm going to represent Crenshaw High School. So, one, this is indeed long overdue, but justice is never too late to happen. And as I stand here, as Chief Moore mentioned, blocks away where a great injustice occurred, we also have to look at the fact that during that great migration of African Americans out of the South, out of enslavement, Robert William Stewart came to Los Angeles. And when you think about why Los Angeles and the opportunities that W.E.B. Du Bois often talked about during that period following in the early 20s, for black people, it was a great place for opportunities. And when I think about his trials and the tribulations that occurred after he was falsely arrested, after he was accused, after he was jailed, I think about what he must have thought about in that jail cell. Because most of us know that those type of injustices in the South led to you being lynched. There would be no trial. There would be nothing akin to redress. But I also look at the fact that he was the first. He was the first. And when I say he was the first and opened the door for legions of African Americans like myself and like every one of you that are African American, but it also transcends race, because diversity matters. Diversity when it comes to race, when it comes to gender, when it comes to sexual orientation, those things matter. And he was the first. And make no doubt about it, since 1889, there's never been a period in the Los Angeles Police Department when there was not anyone that looked like him, that looked like me, and looked like so many of us. As representatives of the African American communities that always existed in the city of LA since its founding, we were an intricate part of developing the relationship for whatever it was to be. So I look at his legacy. I'm a proud part of his legacy. But every one of you that wear a badge, the one thing we had in common, and we have in common, is we're Los Angeles police officers, regardless of our colors, regardless of our genders, or any of those other things. And we stood for the same thing he joined the Los Angeles Police Department for. And I think about how much better the department would have been if justice would have been served, if after he was released from custody, he was able to come back to the department. And even though that terrible thing happened, he wanted to come back. He wanted to come back. And I truly believe that had he come back, there would not have been the bitterness in his heart, but America would have actually worked the way it was supposed to work. Democracy, for which we all stand and swear to as an oath, would have had the meaning that it had, because that would have symbolized for him that despite being born enslaved, despite all of the obstacles, despite his skin color, democracy worked. So I thank Mike Moore for doing this from the moment I told him about this injustice, and I never will forget, without hesitation, he said, JT, we got to fix this. And probably the most important person that I have to thank for this, because this was not my research. I've done research on the history of black officers, but I kept running into a stone wall with Robert William Stewart. And this man here, Mike Davison, extremely thorough in his research. He even has where Robert William Stewart lived. We owe him a debt of gratitude for restoring and bringing to light our history. So please, I ask you give him a round of applause. And in closing, I'd just like to say, again, diversity matters. It's not really as important, what happened to him then, because this was common at that time. It really was. But Los Angeles and the Los Angeles Police Department represented opportunities, and it still represents opportunities. Opportunities to serve our communities and opportunity to make for a better and safer Los Angeles. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Chief. And lastly, I'm going to bring up the person that has really spent countless hours digging through the California Eagle, digging through other publications, periodicals, and other available information to get the facts right, to truly honor the legacy and honor the man that Robert William Stewart is and was. Mike, would you like to come up and say a few words?
Thank you, Deputy Chief Hamilton, and Chief Moore, Councilmember Price, JT. Especially big thanks to Chief Moore, because however many hours I might have sat on my brains hitting search on my computer researching this, we wouldn't be here today if Chief Moore hadn't decided to make this happen. So again, thank you, Chief. And it's also, as Chief Moore said, it's appropriate that we're here at this location. For the last 36 years of Robert Stewart's life, he lived on Cirrus Avenue, just a few blocks east of here, between 7th and 8th. So this was his neighborhood. Now, why did I get into researching this? I was doing the research on an old Los Angeles City Hall building. Not that one over there that we still have, not the one before that, but the one before that, used in the 1880s and 90s, which was also LAPD headquarters at the time. So I looked and, well, let me see what happened with the LAPD while they were in this building. They got their first matron, they got their first patrol wagon, and they got their first black officer. His name was Robert William Stewart. And he started as it was known at the time, said it was started in 1886, but no one really knew what happened to him. So I thought, well, let me start digging into it. And I dug and dug and dug, and finally, the story began to fall into place. And I should also mention at this point that retired LAPD Lieutenant Rita Knecht did much of the genealogical research after my initial research was put on the internet, which, if you want to read the whole long story, it's over 30,000 words, so get comfortable if you're going to read it all at one swoop. It's previouslosAngeles.blogspot. That's where you can find the whole story. You can see where Stewart was born in Kentucky in 1850. He moved to Jeffersonville, Indiana about 1880, where one of the people he met was John Malcolm Glass, who later moved to Los Angeles and became chief of police while Stewart was on the force. Stewart then, after about 6 years in Jeffersonville, moved to Los Angeles, started working for a transfer company, taking care of their horses, and eventually, because of his political involvement, was selected to be one of the first 2 African Americans on the Los Angeles Police Department. And that was in March 30th, 1889, was the day Stewart and a man named Joseph Henry Green were appointed as the first 2 African American police officers in Los Angeles. Green's career only lasted about 10 months. He was let go when the size of the force was reduced, but Stewart, through his good work and his relationship with Chief Glass, was able to stay on the department until the horrible miscarriage of justice robbed him of his career, his reputation, and forced him to work as a laborer and janitor until he was 80 years old, basically until he died. So there are other stories that, like Stewart's, that are still to be researched, I'm sure. I didn't do anything heroic in doing this. Like I said, I sat on my brains and hit search a lot on my computer. So there are other stories that can be researched that are still out there waiting to be discovered. People who are police officers, firemen, just everyday civilians that had to go through things like Robert Stewart did, but their stories aren't known yet. And hopefully there will be the interest in getting them told. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mike. So in closing, I would like to point out once again, as Chief Moore did, the role that the LA Police Historical Society and the LA Police Museum has